Writing frames should be provided to students in order to participate in all activities. These frames should be teacher-generated and relevant to the current task. Providing samples allows for students to mimic sophisticated language and better understand expectations.
Okay, so let's learn from each other, which I think we've been doing a lot this whole time because the chat is really live. But feel free to share your own successes or challenges with language frames and how they transcend into oral language. The role of environmental text is just as critical in our digital classroom as in the traditional classroom. So perhaps even more so, seeing as we're not there to provide that support. Therefore, language frames for discussion and oral language practice should be accessible for students at all times. This can be done on whatever platform you're currently using, whether it's Google Classroom or even if you're on Zoom or Meet and you're throwing these frames in the chat for them to utilize. So I'm gonna actually take a look at this chat. And Kelley, can you share something that the student—
Well, Erica, I just wanted to address one point that was brought up in the chat regarding the links that we're sharing.
Okay.
Some people are saying that they're not clickable, or you should be able to copy and paste those links. In some cases, you can just click on them and they will open in a new window. But if that's not the case, you should be able to copy and paste that into your browser. However, as we said earlier, we will be going through the chat and making sure that anything that we have presented today, any resources that we have shared, any links in the chat, we will be following up. We have the roster of participants, and you will be receiving all of that information as a follow-up to today's session. So no worries if you're not able to access a link that has been entered in the chat. I'm just looking at other responses here. Well, we had a few about that. I see sentence starters and paragraph frames, as we had talked about earlier, using language frames. So we are using many of these resources already in our classroom. These are things that we've brought with us from our traditional classroom that we're offering now in our digital classrooms. But we want to make sure that it's not just supporting our written work, that we're also making these things available to support our any oral interactions that are happening in our digital space. Suzanne, do you have anything that you've observed from the chat or any other points that you'd like to make regarding dual language?
Yeah, so you brought up a very, very good point in terms of oral language, right? We see a lot of writing frames or sentence starters, and we have traditionally used these. We know how to use them when it comes to writing activities. But these are very, very important, and actually it may help build that student participation in a digital classroom if we engage these for in both languages in a bilingual classroom, but we also use them for our speaking and listening activities. It's very, very important, especially in a digital classroom. We don't want these listening and speaking activities to kind of fall on the wayside, right? We don't have the normal interaction that we would have in a regular classroom, so we have to make sure that speaking activities are still part of our instructional practices, and they don't fall on the wayside. So incorporating these, giving the students opportunity to record themselves. There's a great one that you have there, counterclaims and rebuttals. These are great if you have them in both languages, and they can actually, instead of writing, they can articulate their answer orally. This is great. They can record themselves. It doesn't have to be live, and they could just upload it. So these are great activities and resources that you should incorporate in a digital classroom in order to make sure that you do have the four modalities of reading, writing, listening, and speaking in both languages in a bilingual classroom.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I'm seeing, some things brought up in the chat about, well, there's questions about Powtoon and whether it is easy to use. I don't know that I am the best judge for that. I'm really tech savvy, and I tend to pick things up pretty quickly. but it can be time consuming if you're trying to link, you know, music and any other audio, you know, if you're doing a voiceover like I did here. So it can be time consuming. And then I also saw something about students not wanting to record themselves. And I taught middle school for many years. And so one thing I found was, you know, my younger students, my sixth graders loved recording themselves, and it was so exciting. But as they got older, they become a little bit more self-conscious, and they're not really ready to post that and have others see it. And so what I saw a lot of my students do is they would take a Post-it and kind of just draw like a smiley face or something and put that on the camera so you couldn't actually see their face, but you could still hear them. So that was a compromise that I made with my eighth graders in order to get them to participate in the digital classroom using their voices, but not necessarily having their face on camera. So it helped a little bit. I don't know if that's something that might help with your students. But anyway, we are going to continue with the rest of this Powtoon, where we provide tips for tiering assignments and scaffolds.
Graphic organizers should be simple. Use something the students have seen before. Model using familiar content. And consider providing tiered versions where some boxes are pre-populated according to the students' proficiency levels. Reduce the linguistic load by using tools such as Google Translate or talking points to utilize the home language. Adapt or chunk text by using Rewordify, Newsela, and ReadWorks, but also keep the rigor and try and do this on your own. Lastly, pre-teach vocabulary, conduct virtual field trips, and include videos to help build background knowledge. Thank you for joining me, and reach out with any questions.
So just some final thoughts on this last segment. Tiered assignments, such as the one that you saw briefly in the video, can be shared with specific students. But think about it too, how some tasks might lend themselves to incorporating student choice, and you may wish to share these tiered assignments with all students. If you're using videos or virtual field trips in your digital classroom, or even to support your traditional classroom, be sure to watch them in their entirety first, so that you can first make sure that they're appropriate, but also to anticipate, plan for, and provide appropriate scaffolding as needed with your students in mind. You know your students best, you know their needs, and by really vetting these resources, you can plan ahead for the types of supports your students will need to access them successfully.